Morning. We're glad that you're here today. Reminding everybody to wear your mask. We have our mask clock up here. If it goes off, it means somebody's not wearing their mask. If it gets down to 0, we'll dismiss. But mostly that means pay attention so you get it fixed before we start. While we were gone on vacation, we went looking for aspens and trees, leaves changing colors. We were driving around near Monarch Pass, and we saw a couple of trees, and then you couldn't see much before then, but I stopped and wanted to say, I wonder what's up that road. And I got my drone out and looked up, and then just this huge valley opened up. And it was like, oh, this like little hidden valley of leaves and this stream, and we went driving way up in it, and there were some hiking trails up there. It was just this really magical little place. And we're linking it today to a text from Psalm 12. Later, I'm going to be looking at a passage in the book of Revelation when the children of God are being attacked by people all around them, and the people all around them look like they're winning. And God's got a different perspective on the things of the world. So listen and watch Psalm 12. Kingdom in which the way God says and what he says is more important than anything else. I'm glad that you're here in worship. There's a lot of people at home worshiping. There's been a lot of COVID rise in our community. Several in our church have been very, very ill. Just got word this morning that one of our people that's been really, really ill is going to be able to go home tomorrow, and we're really celebrating that. And we want to thank our doctors and lots of people that are working really hard for sick people, but we're taking a pause on lots of things. We're stepping back on some things on advice of our doctors and what's going on in our community. We won't be singing much in the service until the very end, so you sing and then leave, all right? So we still want you to be able to sing a little, but we just don't want you to stew in your juices for very long, right? So sing and then leave. So that's what's going to happen today. But we would like to give you a chance to greet each other. If you're online, we'd love for you to greet one another. The question for today is, have you ever locked yourself out of your car? You ever locked yourself out of your car? Why don't you stand up and greet each other? You ever locked yourself out of your car? Never. Never. Have you locked yourself out of your car? Yes? Locked yourself out of your car? Collective trauma. That's what we can call 2020. Some trauma is experienced by just one person, but when a whole community experiences trauma, it can change the entire fabric of a community. That's what people who study these kinds of events have learned. COVID has traumatized us all. The lengthy isolation has dragged people down, depression is up, confidence is low, fear is up, unclear and conflicting messages have confused people. Masks are inconvenient and have become a flashpoint. Throw in an election on top of a worldwide pandemic, and we have a recipe for disaster. People are irritable, angry, detached, and so ready to get back to normal. But each day, that seems to be slipping further away. Back in March, and again during the summer, I showed a graph developed 20 years ago about the predictable consequences of a traumatic event on a community. I learned about it from a pastor who served First Baptist Church West, just north of Waco, after that community was devastated by a fertilizer plant explosion. Researchers have found that things do not really get anywhere back to normal until about a year after the event is over. We still feel like we are in the middle of this crisis, and no one knows when it will be over. It'll be years that we are dealing with the pain and the consequences of these events. Things that are said and done will stick with us for years. My grandparents grew up in the Depression. It marked them forever. They never really got over it. They had a scarcity and fear mentality that made them save things that were worthless, like a bag of old brittle rubber bands. Many of us will carry this difficulty with us. If you were slightly afraid of germs before, now you might be a germaphobe. If you used to be worried about crowds, you might never gather in a big crowd again. Many are going to have to relearn how to live with others. Even as we hear that a vaccine might be coming, it is likely to be months, if not a full year, before all of us that want the vaccine will be able to get the vaccine. And people are already gearing up to fight the vaccine. Trauma, trauma, and more trauma. 2 weeks ago, I was talking about the remarkable Athens basketball team that won 5 state championships and 2 national championships. I had a number of longtime Athens residents contact me and tell me they'd never heard the stories. Several have wondered how we could have forgotten those glory days. Part of the reason is that almost all of the pictures, all of the trophies,
all of the memorabilia was consumed by 2 fires in our town. The first in 1931 burned up the Colosseum, the famous indoor gym in Athens. And what was not lost then was consumed by a fire on the night of Thursday, November the 4th, 1954, when the Athens High School was set on fire. People were at Bruce Field watching football when the smoke and light alerted people to the fire. It said that they abandoned the football game and came here. While Athens and Murchison fire departments responded, the building was a total loss. The 1954-55 high school annual preserves the pictures and the pain of that night, and then the reckoning of what was lost. Remember our beautiful trophies, the yearbook staff wrote. This is one of the only pictures that survives that shows the national championship cups in the bottom left of the photo. The next year's annual describes the difficulty to the high school students of holding classes in 8 different buildings on 3 different campuses. It feels like the trauma that our students are feeling this spring semester and this fall. Nearly total disruption of their lives. Kids and quarantine, distance learning, and real frustration. I'm sitting here, right behind the rock on our church campus. This rock wall is one of the last physical connections to the Athens High School building that burned down, because Athens High School sat right where the rock is located today. And the building next to it, that we bought 24 years ago, was called the Annex. It is one of the buildings that students were relocated to after the high school burned down. I'm literally sitting at the place of the trauma. Today, I want to take you to a passage in the scripture. It's one of the 7 letters written to the churches. It opens the book of Revelation. There was a letter to Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, and Laodicea. Most of those cities fell into ruin through the centuries, and those names have largely been forgotten. But this letter was written to the only town that still survives, that still has a Christian community. They somehow survived the trauma. And of all the cities, it is the one name that we all know, and one of the Greek words that most people know how to translate. It was the letter to the church of Philadelphia, the original city of brotherly love. And boy, do we need more of that right now in our world. It was written to a group of people that were the survivors of a natural disaster. In AD 17, a massive earthquake struck the area. For years afterward, people wrote about the fear that descended over that community. Because they were in a geologically active area, tremors continued for years and years. We would call it PTSD today. Even the smallest shock wave would send people to live outside for days, if not weeks. In the wake of the earthquakes, Caesar canceled all the tax payments for 5 years. It seemed gracious at the time, but it was nowhere near enough to rebuild the city. People had lost everything, but the tax payments came back with a vengeance. The city changed its name to Neo Caesarea, in hopes of currying additional favor, but to no avail. Not long before this letter was written to this town, the town changed its name again to Flavia, the name of the emperor, in hopes of getting relief. But instead, what they got was a greedy emperor seeking his own gain. In the guise of agricultural reform, he demanded they rip out all of the grape vineyards. Philadelphia was an area of hills and sunshine. It rivaled the vineyards of Rome, and that was the problem. Soldiers forced them to destroy the vineyards, and it plunged the area into economic ruin. On top of that, the schism between the Jews and the Christians became complete. The Christians were thrown out of the synagogue, whereas for many years Christians had been seen as a subset of the Jews. Now they were no longer welcome. This might seem like a minor inconvenience, but it had fatal consequences for the Christians. If a person was a Jew and on the rolls of a Jewish synagogue, they were not required to bring offerings and swear to the emperor, Caesar is Lord. To get tossed out of the synagogue means that a person might have to face death or deny their faith that Jesus is Lord. Let's listen to the letter, that we might find the clues of how they survived the disaster of their day, so that we might survive the disaster of our day.
And to the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, the words of the Holy One, the true One, who has the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, who shuts and no one opens.
I know your works. Behold, I've set before you an open door, which no one is able to shut. I know that you have but little power, and yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name.
Behold, I will make those of the synagogue of Satan who say that they are Jews and are not, but lie. Behold, I will make them come and bow down before your feet, and they will learn that I have loved you.
Because you have kept my command to preserve, I also will keep you from the hour of trial, which shall come upon the whole world to test those who dwell on earth.
I am coming soon. Hold fast what you have, so that no one may seize your crown.
The one who conquers, I will make him a pillar in the temple of God. Never shall he go out of it, and I will write on him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which comes down from my God out of heaven, and my own new name.
He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches.
This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
And so that little community in Philadelphia was beat up and beat down. Their relationships were destroyed. The places that they used to be able to go, they were not allowed to go anymore. Economically, they were in ruin. They had lost their main source of income and all the people that were around them about that. And physically, the place was a disaster. Ruins were everywhere. People were living out in caves. It was just a total disaster. The letter that's written is written to that group of people that Paul had visited and helped share the gospel with. And he's like, and somehow they survive it. And one of the ways they survive it, and one of the ways that we'll survive a pandemic, is through vital community. How we treat each other, what we do with each other really, really makes a big difference. And in God's vital community, the excluded are included in God's new radical community. The people that feel out find a way into the community of love. And you can tell that in a crisis, it's the people that are alone, that feel that they're out, that don't have anybody else, that suffer the worst. And that's what's going on even right now around us. We're fragmenting at the exact moment that we need to be pulled together, because it's in community, loving each other, that we're going to find the great healing that we need for our world. This is a synagogue that's just up from where Jesus lived near the Sea of Galilee. A couple of years ago, when Cindy and I were in Israel, one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to walk from Nazareth to Galilee, because we know that Jesus grew up in there and he made that journey back and forth, and there's a trail called this Jesus Trail. It's the old Roman road that traveled that way. And so we got up one morning and we got dropped off and we started walking that way, and we hiked all the way. And the place we stopped was this synagogue. And this synagogue, from the other direction, I went out at night and took a picture. That down there, and the lights in the middle, that's Capernaum. That's where Jesus spent most of his ministry. That's where Peter's family's house was. That was the center of the fishing community that Jesus was connected to. So looking over that hillside is this synagogue. And it just reminds us that what they had then was synagogues everywhere. Every little community, all the people gathered together. And it was in that group that they found strength against the Romans, because it was there that they came and looked at the text. They looked at what God had done for them over time, and that was where the resistance was built in their life to overcome in the world around them. Between this synagogue and those lights is a hillside. On the right-hand side, do you see it? And this hillside is famous in Israel because it's the site of the first great revolt by the Jews against the Romans. Herod the Great got his name Great because of his oppression of the Jewish rebels that were on that hillside. And when Jesus came walking down this way to Capernaum, he walked past this most famous site of rebellion. They knew they needed each other. So when we read this letter from from Jesus to the church there at Philadelphia, we've got to know in the background is all of these stories, all of this stuff. And he says, look, I'm going to open a door that no one's going to shut, because the door had been shut to them. They'd been kicked out of the synagogue. They'd been kicked out of the community that they needed. They had been sent out in exile, that you're not allowed to be a part. People that are experiencing trauma and are experiencing it outside of community do very poorly. People that study how we recover from trauma say some people go through bad times and they get stronger, they get more resilient. Some people go through trauma and they get weaker, they get derailed. One of the key differences is community. I can't tell you in ministry how many times I've heard someone say, I don't know how people that don't have church get through this. And I don't either. Because sometimes I walk into situations, the funeral home calls me and they don't have a pastor, they don't have anybody, and they're all alone. And I think that is the worst way to face a trauma. We need each other. This is what John was telling them. This is what Jesus is reminding us. Whatever you do, don't give up on community. That's what God's answer is for troubled times.
Welcome to our Yellow Chair interview today. I'm interviewing Jim Palmer for two really interesting reasons today. So, Jim, thanks for being here with us today.
Good to be here.
So let's assume people don't have any idea who you are. Give them the elevator pitch. Who's Jim Palmer?
Well, my wife, Viola, and I served with our Baptist International Mission Board for 30 years in Honduras and Nicaragua as missionaries, doing church planning and coordinating lots of different kinds of ministries and training pastors. Came to Athens about 10, 11 years ago when we took an early retirement from the board, and currently direct two mission networks. One is a mission network that coordinates work and partnering churches in the States with churches in Nicaragua, called NICA Team for Nicaragua. Another group of churches, our church included, that works in Ethiopia under the banner Ethio Team for Ethiopia.
So that's the way most people know you, as kind of a missionary in residence and traveling and doing all that. But the reason I wanted you to come here today is because you volunteered and served in the election last week.
Right.
And I went and voted, but I really don't know what happens after that. I don't really know much about that process. So can you tell us what you did, where you volunteered, and kind of what happened?
Well, Kyle, because I've lived outside the United States most of my adult life, I didn't know much about the election process either. I mean, Viola and I have voted. We only get to vote for presidents and vice presidents living overseas, because you really don't have a representative,
right,
because you're a resident of a foreign country. And so we would go to the embassy and vote. So coming back, I thought, in this election, I thought, well, somebody has to do that work. Somebody sits behind those computers and does all that stuff.
Right.
And I thought, well, it'd be fascinating to, maybe I could contribute.
Well, so tell us about that. So what are the positions and how many of them are there?
It depends upon the size of the polling place, but you usually have, everyone who works there is considered a clerk, an election clerk.
Okay.
And they rotate and do different tasks, so everybody can kind of do everything.
Right.
There are two election officials beyond the clerks, and that is a presiding judge and then an alternate judge. And both the clerks and the alternate and presiding judge are from different political parties.
So is it balanced, or who's in charge?
It has to be balanced. It
Always
cannot
gotta be
be
balanced.
unbalanced. So if your presiding judge is a Republican, the alternate judge should be a Democrat.
Right.
If there are three Republican clerks, there would be three Democratic clerks.
Okay.
But what's interesting, Kyle, is when we were there, nobody seemed to really say, well, you're the Republican or you're the Democrat.
Right.
It was just like we were there to help people vote.
So you're there, you serve all day long. So tell us, you had an interesting story who you were serving with.
I was with Zoe Kurth and Mariah, two young ladies that are part of our church, and their history professor or teacher, I believe, encourages them to do this.
So, Jim, after it was all said and done, you said you felt even better about the process. So tell me about the security of the process, how that worked.
But there seems to be a lot of security. There's a presiding judge and an alternate judge, and just about everything that has to happen has to happen with those two people authorizing. All the documents have to be signed with
And both parties have to sign
both
it?
parties, the alternate judge and the presiding judge, which are from two different parties,
Right.
have to sign everything. All the documents have to be double signed. When you're finished, the tape that's printed out that shows the results, there's two of those, and both of us have to sign each of those documents. I served as an alternate judge. And even the ballot box, when it is brought out of the machine, there are two locks to it.
Yeah.
And the presiding judge and the alternate judge, both from both parties, have to put the locks on those before they're brought into election office here.
So I imagine people show up and there's some problem. How does that work? Was there a tendency to, were people voting that shouldn't be voting there? How does that work?
The vast majority of people come in, they give you their ID, photo ID, a driver's license, and you look in the computer and their name's there.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes their address is different, or maybe their address is different on their driver's license,
Right.
and they just have to fill out a little piece of paper, change of address, and you file that, and then you punch them in the computer and they vote. Sometimes people would come in and they're not in the machine. And there are several procedures in the guidelines, the voting guidelines, that work to try to say, let's help everybody vote who should be voting. And I think there was just one couple that wasn't allowed to, maybe one couple and one man that were not allowed to vote for several reasons. But there's a provisional ballot that if you, for whatever reason, don't meet the requirements, or you're not registered, or you're not in the machine, you can vote on a provisional ballot. And that provisional ballot has to be looked at again to determine whether it's really authentic or not. And that's done by a committee, but there are very few of those. The vast majority of people are on the rolls. They come in, they show their ID, they get their ballot, they vote, and they get their sticker that says I voted.
At the end of it, would you do it again? Would you recommend people to volunteer in this way?
I think I would. In fact, I think I want to do it again. I think I felt like I was contributing to our democracy. I felt like it was a good process. I enjoyed seeing the people and seeing people vote.
One more thing before we go. Central America, in the middle of all this, a hurricane has come through. Our partners are affected by that. Can you give us an update on maybe how we can help?
Well, I think most people know that Central America is a very poor part of our world, and some of the poorest people in our hemisphere live in that area. And our ministry has been among the indigenous people of Central America. And they were hit last Tuesday, actually on Election Day, by Hurricane Eta that came in as a Category 4 hurricane. There wasn't as much loss of life as we expected, which we thank the Lord for. But a lot of people's homes were totally destroyed. When you're poor and you don't have a lot and you lose it, you lose everything.
Right.
And people don't have insurance. People don't have fallback. There's not savings accounts. And so when people lose it, they're just standing in the middle of rubble with knowing where do we turn from here.
Right.
A lot of hopelessness. And so our partners and our churches have mobilized together. We've identified about 400 families that have been really severely affected along the Principalco River and up in the Mayagna jungle area. And we're going to be putting together some food and tool packages and seed packets that will be carried out this next week. In fact, our team today and this week are putting together those packets and getting them ready to send out to these families that really are left with not a whole lot.
So if somebody here wanted to help, what should they do?
Well, resources right now is the greatest thing. We can't ship food from here. We can't ship rubber boots and machetes from here, but that money can go to this effort, and that money can be channeled through our church or through our ministry. So there are ways to give that money.
Well, we'd encourage you to help. This is a great moment to step in. These are people we have long relationships with. We know where the money's going to go, and be a great way to respond in the middle of this. Jim, thanks so much for all that you do around the world, but thanks so much for volunteering in the election last week.
Well, thank you, Colin.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for our church.
Thanks.
Lord, the light of your love is shining in the midst of the darkness shining. Jesus, light of the world, shine upon us. Jesus, shine. Fill this land with the Father's glory. Blaze, Spirit, blaze. Set our hearts on fire. Flow, river, flow. Fill the nations with grace and mercy. Send forth your word, Lord, and let there be light. Lord, I come to your awesome presence from the shadows into your radiance. By the blood I may enter your brightness. Search me, try me, consume all my darkness. Shine on me. Shine on me. Shine, Jesus, shine. Fill this land with the Father's glory. Blaze, Spirit, blaze. Set our hearts on fire. Flow, river, flow. Flood the nations with grace and mercy. Send forth your word, Lord, and let there be light. As we gaze as your kingly brightness, so our faces display your brightness, ever changing from glory to glory. Mirrored here, may our lives tell your story. Shine on me. Shine on me. Shine, Jesus, shine. Fill this land with the Father's glory. Blaze, Spirit, blaze. Set our hearts on fire. Flow, river, flow. Flood the nations with grace and mercy. Send forth your word, Lord, and let there be light.
So the first way that the Philadelphian church survived was because they stuck together. They found a way to be together in this really difficult place. The second thing that they did is they learned these life lessons and they held on to them. It's really important to pay attention in the middle of a situation and reflect in a bigger way about where the world is headed and how things are. Your belief, your faith can hold you in the middle of a traumatic experience if you can learn to trust God over time. This is a tsunami stone. So So just for grins, how many of you know what a tsunami stone is? 4 or 5 of you know what the tsunami stones are. These tsunami stones are put up around the coastline of Japan, and they mark the high water mark of ancient tsunamis. They've been putting them up for literally over 1,000 years. So it's a country where the tsunamis come over and over again. The water rushes up miles away from the ocean coast, and where the debris line stops after a tsunami, they put down the tsunami stones. And they say, here's where the danger comes to. So John, in this letter, he's translating this letter to them and says, like, you need to know what the danger looks like, and you need to pay attention to it. You need to mark it out. So he says, I know that you have little strength. Now, these are people, they didn't have political strength. They didn't have financial strength. They weren't in charge. They were at the bottom. He says, I know you have little strength, yet you've kept my word. Like he says, you've held on to the thing that I've given you. You took these lessons, you didn't deny my name. Like people were trying to get you to quit me, and you didn't ever quit me. Since you have kept my command to endure patiently, I will keep you. So this is the life lesson that you learn from the Bible over and over again. You study all these stories over and over again. When God shows up, he tells you you can make it. If you'll hold on to his word and truth, he's going to be right there with you. And he says that over and over and over in this little letter to them. What you've learned, hold on to those things. The question for us is, can we learn the lesson? Or when we get into trouble, do we panic? Look around and say, what's going on? We don't know. Or do you look at trouble and go, okay, this is trouble, but I know where the outlines of trouble are. I know what happens, and I know how to build my life. I know because we've set down the markers in our life, like these tsunami stones. Somebody's gone all through Japan, and they've taken pictures of all the tsunami stones they can find. There are hundreds of them. They're marked in every little community. Everybody knows what the tsunami stones mean and what they look like. This is probably the most famous of the tsunami stones. And written on its side, it translates like this: high dwellings are the peace and harmony of our descendants. Remember the calamity of the great tsunamis. Do not build any homes below this point. Recently, right, you remember the tsunami that came there that flooded the nuclear reactor? This tsunami stone is uphill from all of that building. They didn't pay attention to the warning that they wrote themselves. They refused to learn the lesson. They didn't trust the words. So this is what happens to us. Challenges come our way. We abandon the truth. We panic. We get all frantic and needy. We strike out at others. We respond in all sorts of ways instead of. Trauma comes our way. We trust God's word. And God says, you might be weak, but you are stronger than you imagine because you're not alone. I'm coming. I'm with you. And God wants you to hold on to that lesson, because if you can hold on to that, I can make it because I'm not alone, then you can make it through almost anything that the world dishes out to us. The people that survive trauma survive because they have faith in the future. Kirk is getting ready to play, and as he plays, I want you to spend some time thinking and asking yourself, what is God teaching me right now that I don't need to forget? What do I need to be learning right now? Maybe you need to write it down like a tsunami stone. Don't build below this line. Don't forget what God is teaching you right now. They survived the trauma of the loss of their income, the loss of their safety and security, the loss of their kind of synagogues, their growing communities, because they stuck together and they had faith that had been true and proven to them over time. And lastly, because they understood how important it was that they live with urgency. Now, urgency is not frenetic. Urgency means living for what really, really matters. Now, Jesus grew up in Nazareth, which is the north part of Israel. His ministry was over by the Sea of Galilee, upper right-hand corner, that blue dot. Just south of there is the Jordan River, and the road that goes from the north to south follows the river. And then you see a red dot there. That's a town called Bet-Shean. And Bet-Shean was the large Roman outpost near where Jesus was. It was a massive city. And the reason it was there is because it sat on the crossroads of everybody coming up from the south, everybody coming from the north, everybody heading over towards Europe, everybody heading down to Egypt, had to come past this spot. And that's where they collected all the taxes on the people going back and forth. Really important. Just a few miles from where Jesus was this massive, massive Roman town. It became lost completely to history. Earthquake and then flood covered it over. And this is what it looks like now. Columns crashed down, not much going on there. That's what Philadelphia looked like. The town was devastated by an earthquake. Everything was just all falling apart. And then the words that Jesus writes to them grow up out of the middle of that thing. It says, I will make those. I will make them come. I will. You can see Jesus is making these promises about what the future is going to look like. If you live in the ruin, you might think that's the way it's always going to be. But if you have Jesus on your side, he says it's not always going to look like this. He says, I am coming soon. I'm going to change things. And the way things look to you, it's not going to be that way always. I'll make a pillar, he says. I will, to him who overcomes, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. And that refers back to something in Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, there were two pillars, Jachin and Boaz. There are these massive pillars. They had names. They were so important. And everybody knew that when they came into the temple and they saw the pillars, they were the representation that God is going to stand through time. He's what's going to last. Like if you live around an earthquake, what you understand is stuff is going to fall apart and it's going to fall down. And what is left is what is important. This is what Bet-Shean looked like when Israel came into existence in 1948. It was a high hill and then fields all around it. And they began to start farming it. They're clearing out the trees and they're farming. A guy is plowing his field and he hits a rock. And he's irritated. And so he gets a shovel out and he's trying to dig the rock up. Now the rock was round on the top. It didn't take him long to realize that it was a column or a piece of a column. And so he dug and dug and dug and dug because it was one of the last standing columns from Bet-Shean from 2,000 years before. It was that column right there in the middle. It was still standing up straight, no matter what. It had made it for 2,000 years, standing up straight. Most of the rest of the city, all falling apart. If you knew that Jesus was coming tomorrow, what would fall away from your life? Just be shaken out and say, that's not important. And what would be the column that was standing that matters? That's what it means to live with urgency. It means to live about the stuff that really matters and that all the other stuff fall away. What could you make right? What relationship do you need to fix? What attitude do you need to correct? Are you ready for Jesus to show up? He just wants to sift you. He wants to shake you. He wants to let all that other stuff fall away so that what you'll do is live for what's important in life. Jesus says, I'm coming. I'm coming soon. We're starting a series from here to the end of the year, which is Look Who's Coming. Jesus is coming. He says this over and over and over again, I'm coming. In the book of Revelation, it's all about him coming back. Who's going to come when he arrives? The Lord of heaven is going to come. And I hope that you'll take the cup and you'll open it up and get the bread out. Who's coming? The bread of life is coming. That which you need to survive and live every single day. The Lord of life is coming. And he says, take and eat. Who's coming? The Lord of love, who loves you so deeply. That's what he says to them in Philadelphia. He says, all those people that are running you down, I'm going to remind them that I love you. And I'm going to write my name on you, that you're loved. This is the new covenant poured out in love for you. Take and drink. And we're going to pray together as Jesus taught us to pray. Would you stand as we say the Lord's Prayer? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. Would you be seated?
How are we going to survive the trauma of our day? By stepping into vital community. We need each other right now. Those Christians in Philadelphia had to learn to live up to the name of brotherly love, even in the midst of a society where families were being torn apart. By holding on to life lessons, we can either live in reaction to the events of our day, running from fear to fear, or we can take a deep breath, step back, and learn. And when we set those lessons down like tsunami stones, we'll be able to survive trouble after trouble because the waves will not reach us. By living in urgency, COVID is helping us learn what we can live without. That's what urgency does. It sorts, it clarifies, it reduces, and the stuff that is left is the stuff that matters. Urgency does not mean frantic. It means intentional. The reduction of wasted effort and seeking authentic living. On the 4th of November, 66 years ago, 20-year-old Billy Joe Short confessed to setting fire to the curtains of the auditorium on the 3rd floor of the Athens High School. In the days that followed, it became clear that Billy Joe was a troubled individual. Just 3 months before, he'd been released on parole from the penitentiary. After his arrest for the high school fire, he confessed to setting more than 20 fires since he first tried to burn down his own home when he was 8 years old. It solved crimes in Corsicana, Palestine, and other local communities. Just 35 days after the high school burned down, his trial began in Athens. His lawyers sought to have him certified as insane. The state, however, wanted a criminal conviction. It took a week to get an impartial jury. People were amped up by the destruction of the school. Then, after nearly a week-long trial, the jury deadlocked on the question of his mental fitness. By the end of December, he was back in prison, serving the remainder 2.5 years on his burglary conviction. there's no mention of a second trial for the Athens fire. In 1971, when he was 37, his name again appeared in the headlines of a sensational murder trial in Tyler. He was the first person sentenced to death in Smith County in over 30 years. His family gave testimony at the trial of his long-term struggle with mental illness and their inability to get any real help. His case was eventually commuted to life, and that's the last trace I can find of him. When the fire trucks pulled up to the fire, he was standing outside the school. He never denied lighting the fire. He needed help, but it does not look like he got it. The trauma of his life overwhelmed him and so many others. What was the key that would have helped his life, that would have set him on a different trajectory? What would have happened if they'd have sought to help him, to understand him instead of punishing him? What if we treat people with whom we disagree with love, kindness, respect, instead of hatred, hostility, and disdain? I'm inside the old annex building. It served as the 9th and 10th grade classrooms while they built a new high school. When the church bought it, we found this huge old safe. No one had the combination. It has sat here unopened for 25 years. Over the years, I've come in here and tried to solve the combination riddle. I've put my ear to it. I've tried to feel it with my fingertips like they do in the movies. The door has stayed firmly shut. If I only knew the key. In the letter to the Philadelphia church, John tells them that Jesus has the key that opens doors. Jesus wants you to know today that he holds the key to our survival, to your health and hope. We don't need to be searching the world for answers. We don't need to be researching the internet for answers. Jesus has the answers. He has the key. It is found in his people. It's found in his word. It is found in love and grace. What Jesus wants to do more than anything else is open the door of life to you, to write on you his name. This is my beloved child.
Would you please stand as we sing the servant song this morning? If anyone wants to be first, he must be servant of all. Mark 9:35. We are travelers on a journey, fellow pilgrims on the road. We are here to help each other walk a mile and bear the load. I will hold the Christ light for you in the night time of your fear. I will hold my hand up to speak the peace you long to hear. Sister, let me be your servant. Let me be as Christ to you. Pray that I may have the grace to let you be my servant too. Brother, let me be your servant. Let me be as Christ to you. Pray that I may have the grace to let you be my servant too. I will weep when you are weeping. When you laugh, I'll laugh with you. I will share your joy and sorrow till we've seen this journey through. When we sing to God in heaven, we shall find such harmony. Born of all, we mourn together of Christ's love and agony.
So glad that you've been here today. Hope that you're involved somewhere with serving other people and encouraging one another. And pray for our church as we kind of keep trying to make the right decisions about what's going on next. We're not having Bible fellowship groups. If you haven't gotten that word, that's what we normally do now. We're not going to have them for a few weeks for sure, and then we're going to reevaluate that over time. All right, any of the words need to be spoken before we go? If you have anything, I'd love for you to contact me. That's what I need to tell you. My cell phone number, 903-603-4452. Maybe it's going to come up. If you could put it up on the screen. If you have a spiritual decision online, anybody wants to talk about something, let me know. I'll try to help you out. All right, let's say our motto as we leave here today. Love God, live like Jesus, serve others. Let's go.